Hey everyone, welcome back to ATO Rise podcast. We're so excited to be back in studio where we are lifting up the issues of Metro Atlanta. Today we have a phenomenal woman with us, one of our very own board of directors, Terrell McFarland, and she is going to be speaking to us about her expertise in the field as it relates to food insecurity. This is a huge issue, so we're going to learn lots of information and hopefully be able to share this with people that may need it. And so, Terrell, you're with us here in studio. Yes. We got you out here.
I am so glad to be here. Thank you so much. And, you know, one of the things I want to thank you for is what you're doing also.
Thank you.
For children, not only just in Georgia, but even in New York. So I appreciate you. And thank you for your leadership and work.
Thank you for your leadership. And I love all the things that you're doing. We're going to jump into it. Those that don't know Terrell, I want to formally introduce her, highlight some things on her bio that I think are really important, and then we'll jump into the conversation. So Terrell was recently appointed by Share Our Strength as the Managing Director, Early Childhood Health Strategies and Nutrition Education. In this role, she leads a team of talented individuals focused on ensuring that no kid goes hungry. As the former Deputy Director of Military Health Programs, Terrell was responsible for the military line of business for Kaiser Permanente as one of the most critical moments for our nation, veterans, active duty family members, and retirees. Obtaining affordable, equitable, quality health care for the military community is one of the top issues facing the military-connected community today. And Terrell's, as she mentioned, lived that life for 30 years, so she can talk to us about that as well. Terrell grew up the oldest of three in a close-knit middle-class family. Terrell's parents and extended family provided an environment rich in positive relationship that inspired her spirit of service to others. Terrell brings over 20 years of experience setting strategy and leading strategy development within a complex matrix environment. She is highly skilled in analytical teams and management and leadership skills. Terrell previously served as the National Vice President of Military and Outreach Services. And this role, she was responsible for global operations, building relationships, and developing and implementing corporate strategies. I love this part, emphasizing and creating culturally relevant practices and initiatives based on cultural competence and evidence-based programming to train employees and reflect the global population served throughout the military. I mean, your resume is astounding. It speaks to your work as a leader and all that you've been accomplishing over the last 2 decades. But I know your recent appointment is with dealing with food insecurity. Can you talk about the trajectory what sort of led you into that role?
Certainly. So, you know, one of the things I think is important is I actually grew up in a middle-class family, right? But my parents didn't. And so my mother and father grew up in an environment where food was an issue. Right. My mom had a little bit of a different experience. She always says she didn't know she was poor. Wow. My dad said he did. And so one of the things that we grew up, even though we grew up in a middle-class family, is we were always told that we had to give back, right? I think there's a scripture in the Bible that says, to whom much is given, much is required. Right. And so for me, I grew up that way. We would spend Christmases making sure that we did stuff for people in the community. And so I grew up in a very community-based family, not just my family, but the extended family. Right. And so it's a part of sort of my nature.
I love it.
And, you know, one of the things that I've found is that working in that space is not only just professional for me, but it's a personal passion. And so that's kind of what drew me in that. You know, I had a chance to work in the military community and making sure that we provided programs that were high quality programs. And then I started in Head Start, though.
Wow.
And, you know, one of the things people know about Head Start is they, you know, most of them come from low income communities. That's right. And, you know, it is sort of this really big opportunity to work with food insecurities, to work with helping to educate families and mothers or whoever the guardian is about nutrition education. And so from that work, it really sort of drove me to want to stay in that field. And it just fuels me.
I love it. And no, I feel your passion. I think it's so important and critical when you have that upbringing where your parents are exposing you to service. And it just becomes a part of your DNA. It's
Absolutely
natural, and it's something that you naturally lean towards in terms of going into career-wise.
Exactly.
And so I love how you started in Head Start, which I didn't know that about you.
Yes.
But it's a great federal program, and a lot of low-income families do utilize Head Start program. Do we have enough of those programs out here in Metro Atlanta? I know that's sort of, I don't know if it's sort of connected to your role now, but...
Yeah. You know, so one of the things when we talk about not just Head Start, but early childhood structures, one of the other opportunities I had in Atlanta, I worked in a program with a program called Quality Assist. And it was an early childhood program, and it was actually a program for families that served kids in home child care. And at the time, there was a lot of, you needed to be licensed. And so my job was to go into these programs that were having problems with licensing because they typically were home programs that were in low-income communities. And so one of the way I'll answer your question is there are families that need different kinds of programs, right? Head Start is an amazing program. I think it's important to have it, but there's also community-based programs that we need to make sure we have federal funds, training, and then also access to high-quality care, no matter where that parent is getting care. So you asked the question, are there enough programs? There's always a need for more. But the one thing I'll say is the programs that we have already, we need to equip them to make sure that they're providing high quality education. And in some places, that's the only time that a child will get a meal. Right. And so working with USDA and those programs, I mean, obviously they have access to healthy food. But we also need to educate the parents on what is a healthy meal. We need to make sure we have policies. We need to make sure in places where there are food deserts, that we are making sure parents have access to WIC and SNAP. So there's federal benefit programs. And if you think about the number of families that access those programs, we have a lot of work to do.
That really leads me to thinking about COVID. You know, you mentioned kids when they're in school, sometimes that's really the only meal they're getting. And I think about, you know, when I was a student and I was a kid, I went to public school my entire life and I ate in school. And in summertime, we were eating summer free lunch. Because that was the way we ate. And that was that was normal for us because that's all we had. And so I think about our students today, and we're thinking about COVID and they were out of school for such a long period of time. I would assume that there were a lot of food insecurity issues going on then with kids not having that in-person learning and not being connected to cafeteria and free lunch.
And so, you know, one of the things I'll say about that is I want to commend Georgia because Georgia did work with programs like Share Our Strength where they brought food to the community. And so I want to pat them on the back and say, I think we did a good job of making sure that we provided foods to those communities. But the one thing you want to remember is oftentimes the food was actually provided on a bus line. So we're not talking about rural Georgia, our kids had the opportunity to get access to food through bus transportation. So they did bring those foods to the community. But when you talk about rural Georgia, one of the things that we want to think about is there's some unique challenges in places like rural Georgia, where they are often food deserts. They live more than an hour or so from a food pantry or a food bank. And so, you know, thinking about in those situations, yes, we were able to provide food to those kids, but transportation still was an issue,
Talk more about the food deserts if you can. What does that mean? If some people that may be listening may not know what that is, and maybe even food choices. So within food deserts, maybe healthy options as well.
And so you answered the question. There you go. So a food desert is simply a geographical area that does not have access to healthy food options, So you could have a grocery store in an area where and that the food is accessible and that it's also affordable. Right. And so, sometimes people think a food desert is not a place where there might be a grocery store.
Right.
But it could be a grocery store or a corner store. But if they're not healthy food options, then we actually classify those places as food deserts.
Right.
One of the things that you probably will get to asking, but I want to talk about it now because we're talking about food deserts, is thinking about things like agriculture and farms and community gardens. Those are some of the things as we're thinking about rural Georgia. Yeah. And particularly children who are suffering from insecurities, those are places where we actually need to make sure we're making some focus on, because one, it teaches them nutrition education. Right. It actually helps them to become responsible and also helping to sort of grow their own food.
I love it.
And then also where there are places where there may not be a food pantry or there may not be a food bank. It actually gives you access to those things. Farmers, one of the things that we want to make sure that we're doing particularly with our policies and our procedures and government, is really encouraging to make sure farm bills that they're doing, that those things are passing, and that in the healthcare field, one of the other things we're thinking about is giving prescriptions for healthy food, right? That's a whole new process. So
tell us more about that. I mean, what does that look like if we were to have a bill such as that?
So there are some places that they are doing that with grocery stores, right? Where you are able to go into a grocery store and it almost works like a prescription that you get for medicine, except for it's a food prescription, right? And so you go into the store and you have to buy vegetables and you have to buy fruit or you have to buy food that is we consider healthy food. Right. And then there's programs like Cooking Matters, where one of the things that now that I buy it, what do I do with it? Right. And I don't want to belittle that parents don't know how to make healthy food. Let me be very clear. It's about making healthy food that's edible and people want. Right.
That's right.
Because for me, when I go home and I tell my husband, hey, I'm making a salad, he's not as excited as when I say I'm making some smothered fried chicken. And so how do you sort of do those things and teach children at a very early age that nutritious food can be good? Right. And then you start to create generational change.
I love it. And it's so interconnected to health.
It is. It is.
Talk a little more about that if you can, the connection between eating healthy and the consequence if we don't in our communities and sort of what will happen and what we're seeing happen.
So, the cost of healthcare, let's say that goes up. Right. One of the other things that's tied to not eating healthy is things that's happening probably in marginalized communities and communities where there's low income. That is diabetes, hypertension, heart disease. If we start to eat healthy, aside from hereditary, right? There are opportunities where we actually can combat some of those things, right? And so not only that, it really does actually for children who face insecurities, more often than not, they're held back in grades, their health is sacrificed, and they have developmental issues, right? All that is tied to food. Right. And in Georgia, the average cost of a meal is $3.04. There's about 500,000 children, or I'm sorry, 500,000 children that don't have access to healthy food. And one of the things that they estimate, and some of the figures also include seniors and working poor and military. Right. And they estimated that if we actually tied about $664 million to those people that are facing hunger, we actually, those people would no longer be hungry. It's only $664 million. So
we can definitely handle
we can. And again, I don't want to belittle the issue, but just for those numbers that they're counting, if you think about a meal costing $3.04. Right. And so, those are, it's not a problem that we can't solve. We can. We just have to do it with policies. We have to do it with making sure we're changing the environments. We're teaching nutrition education. We're giving access to healthy food. And one of the things that is they're starting to think about is how do you sort of create these grocery stores, right, that are from nonprofits or they're community co-ops.
I love that. I love that. No, you're speaking my language. I mean, I love it. And these are innovative new generation ways that we create healthy options in our communities. But I love what you talked about, the connection between the health and also the developmental delays. A lot of times parents are not educated that depending on what you feed your child, that can cause issues with their development.
Exactly.
And a lot of times I don't think our doctors and healthcare providers give that information enough to families.
You know, you're right. And the one thing I want to say is I'm a firm believer that food is love, right? And so no matter what kind of access a person has, that a mother going into the store when they can't give our dad, give their child other things, buying a bag of Cheetos may be a form of love, right? And so it's not that they're intentionally not doing things that they want to make sure that their child are developing from a healthy perspective, right? We have to think about that.
Right.
And so how do we sort of help them understand that when I buy you a piece of fruit or when I buy you a vegetable and I make it good, that I am actually increasing your lifeline.
Yes.
Right. And so we have to sort of talk about it in those spaces that I think families want to make sure that their kids are eating healthy.
Right.
We have to make sure that they're educated and that it's accessible. When you talk about healthcare, really important, and doctors. And so one of the things, particularly at Share Our Strength, that we're working on, we're working with the American Academy of Pediatrics and asking them to screen for food insecurities, right? And once you screen for those food insecurities, connect them to resources in the community like WIC and SNAP.
Right.
And so that we can make sure that at least they're getting access to benefits and resources that can help fund some of that.
Yeah, no, I love that. Streamlining the services so it's accessible.
Exactly.
But on the topic of accessibility, do you believe that there are barriers to accessing these type of services? And if any, what would you say they are?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We have to make it easier, right? So, for instance, if I go to my pediatrician and I get blood work and I get screened for food insecurities, I shouldn't have to go to the WIC office and get screened again, right?
Wait on long lines
they should be talking to each other.
Oh, yeah.
So when I talk about streamlining processes and closed loop referrals, one of the things that we need to be thinking about is we need to make those things easier. Let's talk about transportation, right?
Absolutely.
You know, one of the things that's one of the biggest barriers is transportation to those particular areas.
Right.
And so all of those things from a community resource basis, there are things that we can do in the community that can help sort of make sure these families have access to healthy food and also health care that talks about prevention of future diseases, which is tied to what we eat.
Oh, this is so informational. I'm just learning as I'm talking to you, but also thinking at the same time how it's important to have those partnerships and collaboration between healthcare providers, CBOs, nonprofit organizations, and county and city services. And a lot of times I feel like government, we operate in silos, and a lot of times we don't talk to each other.
Right.
And we're talking in our circles about the problem, but we have to come together to really solve it.
Exactly. You know, you make a really, really good point. In all those pieces, there are people that are perfecting what they do. And there's not necessarily, I don't think, one organization that does all of it well.
Right.
But if we come together, then, you know, one of the things that'll happen is we can actually combat some of these issues.
Right.
And then you become a perfected program, right? Because you're using the skills and the expertise of all these community organizations combined. So bring your best.
Yes.
And then we can serve those that need us.
I love that. And what I love about community-based organizations is we know the needs of our communities because we're there. We have that direct contact and touch to them. And so being able to funnel those funds through organizations to support families, I think it's needed. It's necessary.
And that's where it should start, right? You know, we talk about human-centered approaches. And a lot of times, you know, we sort of sit in our offices and we decide we know what the issue is. We know how to solve the issues.
Right.
Well, those community organizations, they're talking to the people.
That's right.
They're in the communities.
That's right.
They actually usually know how the best way to sort of access those families and can help us with solutions. And so, you know, I think that is where we need to start.
Right.
Is community organizations and stop presuming that we have all the answers. We have a resource.
That's right.
And the only way that resource can be accessible is if we work with community community organizations that know the community and the people.
That's right. And then another piece that I'm thinking about is the legislative or the policy aspect. How do you see legislators working better? Because in order for them to develop and create and advocate for better legislation and policy, they have to be connected to the people.
That's right.
And to the communities as well. How do you see that relationship working or to make that happen?
Two things I'll say to that is those are still voters, right? And so when we help marginalized communities, their voice, they start to amplify their voices.
That's right.
They get heard a little bit more. So I would first encourage those individuals to vote.
Right, absolutely.
And not saying that they don't, but that would be the first place. The other thing is for community organizations, you know, one of the things, they know the communities.
Right.
And you're seeing a lot of this, right? They're becoming advocates. They're actually holding governments and federal organizations responsible for helping in these. And so I would say that for any community organization, you can't do it all, but figure out what your platform is.
I love it.
And become an advocate for that particular community.
I love it. I love it. Well, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Tara. We're at the end of our segment here, but
thank you.
Hearing all your knowledge and your expertise on food insecurity, I am compelled that we need to do something about it, especially in this area. You mentioned that there's 500,000 or over 500,000 children in the state of Georgia.
In Georgia. That don't have access to
and
nutrition.
Metro Atlanta. What are the numbers?
So I don't know those numbers, but the one thing I'll say is in the state of Georgia, and so in Metro Atlanta, I'll have to get you more of that information because we look at things from a state basis. But yeah.
Okay. But we have a huge issue here.
And
we need to start implementing some of the solutions and strategies that you talked about.
Exactly.
So I appreciate your brilliance on this topic and sharing the space with us and just giving us this information. Now, for parents that may be watching and may even be dealing with food insecurity, is there any particular advice that you can give to them?
Absolutely. One of the things that I'll say for parents is access your WIC. Federal programs.
Right.
Access your SNAP federal programs. For those families that are on Medicaid, you are eligible for SNAP, right? And so those two programs are underutilized. And that's one of the things that I say. The other thing I'd say is look for community organizations that support food insecurities. And hold your government, your Department of Health and Human Services, your local clinics, hold them responsible for that because they are actually supposed to be screening for food insecurities and also providing resources.
Excellent.
And so those are the things that I would advise, sort of meeting you where you are.
Right. That's really helpful. And any advice in terms of talking to their doctors or providers about it?
Yes. So most pediatricians will screen for food insecurities. One of the things that I would ask is most doctors too, once you talk to them, will give you sort of this prescription or a handout of how you sort of prepare or buy healthy food. Here's the other thing. There's a program called Cooking Matters. And Cooking Matters is a program that actually helps with recipes. It helps with buying food. It actually helps with going to the grocery store. It helps with how do you access your WIC and all those pieces kind of in those particular programs. And there's some agencies here in Georgia that use it.
Amazing. Well, that's a resource out there for you parents, Cooking Matters, as well as talking to your pediatrician, talking to your providers. I would even say speaking to the schools. If
you're in an early childhood program like Head Start, or if you're in those other programs, I would definitely talk to those agencies. Your community clinics are a great a great resource, and usually they are more likely to be in communities and people have access to them a little bit more readily than others. But I can't reiterate enough that federal programs are there. And don't let those barriers, it's not easy. We're working on those things, but don't let those barriers stop you from gaining access to what was built for you.
That's right.
Right?
Right. So. Absolutely. Don't let the barriers stop you. I love that, Taro, because a lot of times that's exactly what happens. We get frustrated. We're like, forget it. I'm not going to do this application. I'm done with this. I'm dealing with all these burdens and stress, and I'm hungry on top of that. I got to try to fix this. So a lot of times it could be very frustrating and overwhelming. We know that is an issue, but we don't want you to not access what you deserve and what belongs to you.
And there's food banks and food pantries. I don't want to, Feeding America is amazing. Yes. So I don't want to belittle those kinds of things, that if you are not able to do that, then access your local food banks and food pantries.
Absolutely. And churches.
And churches, I was going to say, and local churches,
Absolutely. Well, Taro, it's been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
I appreciate you for coming on and for sharing a space with me and for your leadership. And also for serving what I raise.
Well, it is my pleasure, and thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Taro. And thank you all for listening and for watching and for tuning in. We want you to lift this message up and share it to your networks, share it to a parent, to a family, to your churches. We want to get this information out here. We got great insight from Taro here. And if you are an educator or perhaps working in early childhood and you want more information, reach out to us. Taro, of those that are watching or listening, wants to reach out to you, how could they contact you?
So my email is Taro McFarland, so TerrillMcFarland @yahoo.com. And so they can reach me there.
Perfect. And we'll make sure we put her email if it's okay.
Yes. And then I'll give you my work email too.
Okay. Perfect. We'll do that. Thank you all for watching. We love you so much, Metro Atlanta. Stay tuned for episode 9, which will be launching and just next week. Thank you all. Stay tuned. We love you.
Bye.
Bye.